Oh look, I can be one of the first to try the completely redesigned Creator dashboard. An update that I'm not allowed to close, so there is a giant blue bar across my dashboard at all times. Very helpful. All right, let's tell the world that we're streaming. At least the lower two-thirds of my screen are streaming. Streaming IndieDev. Putting together science stuff. Paste. And then over here, to paste. Oh, my voice feels unusually fragile today, probably because I did some voice stuff yesterday. But what we're doing today is we're going to turn these loose cables into something that fits the actual layout of the level a little bit. And so what that's going to be is primarily a heavy set of cables running over into this area and through this area. So in order to do that, we're just going to take these end boxes, we're going to replace them with end boxes that make sense, and then we're going to combine them. Now hold on. Of course, as soon as I start the stream, my glasses are covered in dust. You'd think I would have noticed 10 seconds ago. Well, it's maybe not dust. Maybe it's some kind of cheese. It isn't as weird as it sounds. I was just snacking on cheese. But dust generally doesn't turn into weird gummy smears when you try and clean it off. Oh well, it's cleaned off now. I'm just that good. Anyway, we're going to move these end cases out into the sunlight so we can see them. This is just way too dark. So, and this one too. There we go. And as you can see, the ropes automatically recalculate when you do that. So when we combine them into a single unit, we should have an easy time of it. Now the thing we're going to be doing with these boxes is all of these stop boxes are going to be replaced with the correct meshes for this particular unit. I believe this is a type A cable. So we need a type A, or is it not a cable? Is it a rope? What is it? Sorry, I call them something simple, but I keep forgetting what the word is. Might be a pipe. Cable. Why is it? Oh, that's material. I'm just an idiot. We're actually wanting to look at this guy. There we are. Now this is going to be a cable. No, a pipe. There it is. Pipe A mount. And if we click pipe A mount, it's not the right size, not set up right, but that's not too difficult to fix. All we have to do is move it around properly. We're going to want to turn off the box glider. That's obviously incorrect. But the question is exactly how it's supposed to be. And you can see that what we've got here is a scaling issue. But the scaling issue isn't in the connector. It's in the stop object itself, see? So we're going to change the stop object to be scaled properly. And that means that when we actually connect up this cube, we'll be able to properly set it up. So if we just flip this cube over, oh, sorry, it's in global space, so we need to be in local space. There we go, and then we can just move it. There we are, perfect. So that is not too bad. Now we do need to change the material, and we're just going to change it over to the material that we created specifically for this, mounting material. Boom. We'll change the mounting material maybe today to be something a little bit better, but for now that's fine. Now the only problem with this is that this cube, now that it's been fixed, needs to be tweaked a little bit. So we're going to have to try and save this as the new default for our prefab. But stupidly, I did it with rope number 3. So let's go over to rope number 1 and do it here instead. I'm not wasting anybody's time. What are you talking about? All right, so here's the cube. We're going to call this a visual. We'll change it from the cube over into the pipe A. The pipe A mount. I'll flip it. move it, change it. We can make ourselves a nice little song out of that. Just dress up as robots and start singing. So we don't need the box collider, and we do need a different material. There we are. Ah, what? Oh, that was me being dumb. There we are. So you can see that things got a little bit strange there, and I believe it's because the stop might be pointed the wrong way. Let's see here. I think I moved the stop instead of moving the pole. Wait, what's going on here? Undo. 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 Too late. All right, whatever. We're just going to save this rope 3 instead. Oh, wait, rope 3 is also erroring out now. What's going on? So my guess is that the stops are backwards, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Let's see if that's the case. Yeah, it looks like the stops were backwards. Okay, so if the stops are backwards, I do want to do it on rope 1. I just basically got started today. I'm not feeling particularly smart or cunning, so you'll have to pardon me for being a really slow idiot for a little while. I gotta get everything sorted. Boom, and then we'll just take the visual and flip it. Boom, and then we will once again move the stop to reshuffle. All right, this is more like what I expected to see, but I don't get why it's coming down from above like that, unless the extension is pointed in the wrong way. So what is this red line? Okay, so one of the things that was confusing me is there's a red line and it's not on an axis. That red line is the actual path intended for the rope. If we take a look at the rope, it's got this rope, then over here, and then to the stop. So it just kind of courses along on this red path here. The only problem is that I can't remember which direction these things are supposed to point, and clearly they're not pointing in the direction I thought they were supposed to. So I'm just kind of starting to move things around until I start to get the feel that I am supposed to have. And I think, there it is. All right, I think we have it. It's just a matter of whether or not this extension needs to be flipped. I can never remember which direction the extension is supposed to point, but I think that I had it right before and that this is wrong. Yeah. The blue bar is correct for almost every situation, but unfortunately it's backwards on the last element. So that's why we get this kind of unusual setup. But still, all we need to do now is change the material over. And what we can do is simply save this rope as the default rope. That should change the mounting brackets for everybody. See? Boom, 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 boom. But to be honest, I think that this guy might be too damaged. Let's go ahead and revert. There we are. That's better. So once we revert that guy, we no longer have the damage that I caused. But you can see that not all of these cables are made equally. This person over here has the wrong pipe, so he can't use that mount. However, they should be able to use this mount, the pipe C mount. And of course, that uses mounting material 1. For the moment, we can rename that stuff later. Let's call this mounting material A. And this mounting material C. There we go. And then the last mount that needs a little bit of work is this one, which is using the same mounting material, or the same mount, but is obviously wrong. This one needs to be mounting material B, I think. Yeah, there we are, B. And normally we just use the same color material for this one at the moment. We'll figure out a better way to handle it later. Now, there are lots of easier, better ways to handle it, but it's not necessary for us to polish it right now. It's okay if it's a little bit loosey-goosey. So anyhow, creating a mounting element here is just a matter of lining up these mounting brackets into something that feels good. And so what we're going to do is we are going to grab the edges of these boxes and line them up. The other option is to put them at a specific location, like 42, 11, and 56. Because that has nice even numbers, anything else on a nice even number like 42, 11, 56, we should be able to line them up simply by moving them along a ratchet. However, what we really need to do is make sure that they fit together really, really well. And since they are recalculating after every move, they do glitch a little bit. But one of the issues we've got is that the center of these mounts is not where you think it is, because the box is arbitrarily offset. So what we actually need to do to line these things up is to use some vertex snapping, like that. With the vertex snap, it's pretty straightforward to line them up, as you can see. So then what we do is we just grab this guy. Hello. And line him up. There. I think we missed. Yeah, we did. It's too dark. There we go. The big problem with using vertex snapping is that sometimes it will vertex snap to something random far away, which is a little bit difficult to really get to feel right. It'll do like eight minutes of calculation to try and figure out where things are. So you can see that these feel pretty good. I think I like the idea that these are high while the center one is low. As you can see, it's got the wrong side up over here. So we're going to just flip this visual over. There we go. And there we have it. So this is kind of how I like it. I'm not sure that it's going to stay that way forever. But as you can tell, this is a pretty decent set of connectors for a heavy cable box. So let's go ahead and create a box within the rope holder here. And obviously later on we'll change it to something else. But for now, actually it should be empty for now. So we're going to drop this empty over here into the rope. It doesn't really matter which one at this point. I don't want to... I'm just trying to sync them up, and the new prefab system is just barfing. What a pain in the fucking ass. I really wish they'd fix this new prefab system to let us do the things that it's supposed to be able to do. But for some reason, they've decided to make things as hard as physically possible, and it's just obnoxious. Of course, what did I expect? So that's 39.5, and that's 10.9. And that's, I should check, can I just copy the whole bank? No, I can't. Of course not. That would be too straightforward. Man, remember when it was easy to use Unity? No, of course you don't, because there wasn't ever such a time. So I can just grab these stop elements, not that one. That one's the wrong rope. This one and this one. I can just move them into this game object. Boom. I'm not sure why Unity has decided to make it impossible to do anything with prefabs ever, but I can safely say, fuck them. How do I can unpack a prefab in the scene. Okay, how do I do that? Oh, here it is. Okay. So in order to make this work, what I need to do is tell it that it's no longer a prefab, because that obviously solves the problem. Yeah, this is amazing. How did they manage to make their prefabs worse? Were they pursuing the idea that the prefabs would be nestable and that would make everybody happy with the fact that they were now unusable? Is that the idea here? Because, hey, guess what? That was dumb. Anyway, now that we've got this set up, now that prefabs are so rigid that we can no longer use them for anything, we should be able to move this game object around. Why is this not... What happened to the fucking widget? Where's the fucking widget? What the hell is going on? Why is the widget gone? I don't see any signs that it should be gone. Press W 2 times. That just goes over to the move selection. It doesn't give me the widget. Okay, so these things have a widget. What the hell's going on here? Okay, so if I select this thing, it's got a widget. See that? It's got a widget. If I select these things, they've got a widget. If I select this thing... Oh, okay, of course. The widget is down here at 0, 0, 0 or whatever. That makes sense. So the whole point of this was I was going to move these stop objects to be at 0, 0, 0. But for some reason, when I manually moved the game object to be in the right position, it wasn't in the same position. I think that chances are I was using a local coordinate. What a pain in the ass. We're just going to have to manually do it all again. And then we'll just move this up. No, you are incorrect. The best part about that is that when I hit F to focus in on it, it focused in on where the content was, and the widget was nowhere near that location. Probably because it was set to local, and if I'd set it to global, it probably would have been fine. Well, anyhow, let's get these set back up properly. They're now completely incorrect. All right, that's fine. So it took a lot of doing, and I had to disable the most useful feature in Unity, but now they're in a unit, and you can see that they just automatically calculate all together. And we can move them over into our setup area. There we go. The idea being that the player will naturally follow Mifa says, so much for fine-tuning. Well, I don't really know why Unity makes the choices they make. It's almost a miraculous lack of... They do everything that I am using gets turned off by Unity at some point. They almost never think the features I use are important, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But what can you do? There we go. Now, the other thing we're going to want to do here is create a box. So these are going to be end connector. We'll call it heavy end connector. And then we're going to want to put a box in. There we go. And this box will just be a stand-in for the mesh we're eventually going to use for the router, the machine that that will connect these boxes up. Now you can see one thing here. These are not actually square on. They're all rotated in a strange way. So we're going to unrotate them, like so. And if we pull them out, I think you'll find that they're in the wrong position now. So we're going to move everything back out into the sunlight without dropping it down to the bottom of the ocean this time. Yeah, because I set them up when they were all lined up on off axis. That was just dumb on my part. That was nothing to do with Unity. There we are. It's much easier to do this if you don't use such a dark material. That doesn't seem right. There we are. And then this box can be set up square on now with no worries like that. For the material, we'll just go ahead and use a mounting material just so it looks like it's part of the same sort of device setup. And we're going to want to add in some lights, just because that's kind of one of the things that we are using to make it so we can see what the heck's going on. So we're going to be using spotlights. There are a couple of things we can do to make these lights better. And one of the things, I guess we're going to want to use a point light. I'm trying to think about the best way to do this. And I think that the best way to do it is use a particle effect, which is just glowing seafoam, glowing water particles. Because we don't want to try to simulate the effect of the light on actual fog. We have a thing to do that. Aura, in theory, does that. But as far as I can tell, Aura doesn't work for underwater type scenes. It's specifically for other scenes of above water sort of fogs. I can't get it to really look right for underwater stuff. And part of that is probably because it's not really intended to have a million point lights based on it, It's too many point lights. So what we've got here are 2 point lights, and you can see that when I cloned the point light, we immediately lost the point light. If we turn this one off, you can see how... I turned off both, my bad. If we turn off just one of them, you can see how this one actually gets simulated, and then this one breaks it. And that's because the radius is so large and we're in scene view. If we were in a different view... okay, so that doesn't actually edit both of their ranges. That's an interesting choice. Anyhow, if we bring the range down, I think if they don't overlap, it'll work. No, there's something. It's just the number of lights that are allowed in scene view. It should work fine in game view. But what we're going to want to do is create a little bit of a particle system around that point light. But by a little bit, I mean a very little bit. We're going to want it to be like super, super tiny and basic. The emission shape is going to be a sphere. And we're going to want to have it throughout rather than on the surface. Yeah, that'll do, I think. Mifaz says, would be cool if Unity had override material mode like in Blender. I haven't used override material mode in Blender, just because I don't really do material work in Blender very much, since it doesn't export to Unity very easily. Anyway, this is basically what we want, but it's obviously the wrong size and the wrong scope and speed and all that stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring down the simulation speed to 0.1, and we're going to bring down the emission. I guess that's probably about right. And what we'll do is we'll change the start size to random between 2 constants, and that's going to be 0.05 and 0.15. That's probably too big. 0.1. And then we're going to want to change the color over lifetime to include some alpha blends. So just shoop. And then we're going to create some noise. That's way too much noise, so we're going to just lower the strength way down here. That feels about right. And now it just looks like our sphere is a little bit too big, so we're going to just lower the sphere size a tiny bit here. Okay, and you can see that what's happening is it's trailing all of the particles away in a strange direction. Let's go ahead and pre-warm. And I think that that's because the noise scale is the wrong scale. So the issue here is that all of these particles are catching the same noise. So if we were to change the frequency, maybe to 2, that should be a little bit more in line with what we want. Yeah, that's better. So this is a pretty decent particle system for light particles, particles lit by a light source, that is. But we're going to want to make it so that they look okay even when you're pretty close. What we need to do is change the arc. What I really want is this to really stick. Oh, Mifaz says matcap mode. So I can turn off lighting and all that stuff. It's just not generally worth it for the small edits that I'm doing. What I would like to do is I would like to change this so that it has a different emission, because the emission shape of sphere doesn't seem to give us the option of being centered as much as I would like. I would like it to be... See, the arc is not what I want. What I want is the inside to outside, not the around the edge. So if I do this with ping pong, it'll be like going around in circles around this sphere. See that? But what I actually want it to do is to have more in the center and less on the outside, and that doesn't appear to be something that is something I can specify. What a shame. All right. Well, this is pretty good. It's not great. We're going to go ahead and change the material out for one of our dust materials. Obviously the bright one rather than the dark one. And that'll mean it looks not too bad even close up. We're also going to want to have some rotational speed here. Or we can just have it have a random start rotation, I suppose. I think I'm going to want to change this color over lifetime. There we are. And we can change the size over lifetime a little bit to give it a little bit more flavor. And I think that we're going to want to do that like so. Now let's just see how that feels. If I then delete this light and duplicate this light, I can move it to the other side, and we will have two sets of particle systems, both of which are attached. And then if I move the heavy end connector into the dark, we should still be able to see the particle systems glowing in the dark, even if the lights are quite small. And another thing I can do, of course, is I can come up with other sorts of systems for the particle effect. Like I can try and come up with another kind of glow that feels a different way. And we're going to rotate this, the whole setup, not a specific end connector here. There we go. And you can see that we've got one coming through the ground. So we're just going to tweak this until it stops falling through the surface. And that's just because the thing I created is kind of half-assed. So you can see that every time I move it, it actually moves it twice, and the first bit works, and then the second one drops back below. That's okay. We'll just go ahead and try this out, see what it says. So you can see that the idea is you'll be able to track these ropes as they coil across the surface. And we will probably do some stuff with making them have additional decorations, dust and stuff. Now this part I'm not too concerned about because it's going to change over time, but it's worth noting as sort of a general feel that we're going to get out of it. And here you can see that we've got a couple of ropes just kind of flying off, and then we got this guy here. And as we get close, you can see that there is a light source, and you can see some particulates being illuminated. But I don't feel that those particulates are bright enough. So let's change these particles so they are considerably brighter. While we're at it, let's move the character over there so that we don't have to swim all that way every time. There we are. That should be easy for us. So what I really want to have happen is the brightness of these should depend on how far away they are from the center of the sphere. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if there's any way to do that. Now, one way to do it is to create our own shader. Particle shaders in the system that we're using use object coordinates based on the central location of the particle system rather than the central location of the particle. So if we wanted to have a specific particle setup, we could do it using that. And I think it's probably worthwhile because this is something we're going to use a lot. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a new material. Yeah, this is the right place. I guess we'll right click and do it this way. Create, amplify, shader, surface shader, post-processing stack, unlit. I think it's unlit that we want because we're actually faking the light, and that's kind of the point. Grind, grind, grind. Hey, look, here I am. Only problem is that we've had some trouble with the unlit shaders recently. Unity recently updated, and they changed it so that the quote-unquote legacy shaders, you know, the ones that work, no longer defaulted correctly. So we've been having some issues with that. Anyway, we're going to call this lamplit particles. That's particles. It's not quite the same thing. Open that in Shader Editor. And the reason I'm calling it lamplit instead of lit is because lighting is something these don't actually have. So we're going to, so look at this, hidden templates. Yeah, that's not it. There we are. And we're going to try to get this to feel right. So what we're going to do is we're going to immediately create a particle based on this, a material for our particles, that is. So if we right click on it and hit create material, you can see how it creates a particle, a material specifically for that material, for that shader. My mouth stopped working. So over here in the particle system, we can drop that into the renderer. There it is, see that? And we'll just drop in our lamplit particles. Boom. And you can see that it's this glorious square box. So there are obviously a lot of things we're going to be doing to get that to work. One of the things we need to make sure is that it doesn't happen at the wrong time. I'm not at all sure that this actually will allow for transparency correctly. I don't actually need transparency in a fading sense, but I do need them to be not square. So let's see if I can get that to work. So we're going to need to have a texture. There you go. We're going to go ahead and call this albedo, and we're just going to drop that straight into frag color, and then we're going to save it. And then over here, we should see that texture pop up. There we are. And we can just select that same fog texture we were using, that same dirt texture. It's just a generic fuzz. There it is, silt. Boom. And the idea is that we want the alpha to be the alpha, but as you can see, what we get instead is a flat white, because this is just a couple of opaque white particles on a field of transparent white particles. And unfortunately, it appears that that is not going to do it. So what I just did is I switched it over to just being the alpha, see? And then if we do that, you can see that what we have is a bright center and then a black outline. So the unlit shader is not going to be of any use to us if we are planning to use the system as it is. We could use like a spherical mesh, but that would be a little bit expensive. What would make sense is if I could change the blending, but I'm not sure I can. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. So what we can do here is we can call this an additive blend or an alpha blend as we prefer. And we can try and get that to work by changing that value and then telling it that something has changed so we can save it. Okay, so you can see the outline is still completely black. No, it's not completely black. It might actually be correct. Hold on. Here's our particle system. If we take that orange line away so that I can see what the heck is going on. There we go. Yeah, it's black. Let's go ahead and just increase the size so I can see it a little bit. There we are. So what we're getting here is the glitch that we were talking about the other day. You can see how the transparency exists, but it is interacting with everything else in the world in just the most epically awkward way. It's not even, and I tried for like an hour to make this work. What we can try and do is figure out how to have this work. But I'm trying to figure out what sort of... Sorry, I'm tweaking things on the other screen that you can't see, but it's not making any difference. Oh, it's set to render type opaque. That might be it. Let's go ahead and set it to transparent cutout for now. No, you can see how that still causes all sorts of issues. Did it actually save? Yeah. It doesn't feel like it's running at the right time. I might need to not use the unlit setup. This is a disappointment. I wish that I knew what was going on with these because Unity did not screw up this bad before. The systems, the shaders they used to use were fine. And any shaders I created would interact with them fine. But these days, anything that has any level of transparency just does not work. And I mean, this is a situation where there is no transparency to half of the things it's ignoring. That seawater is not transparent. It's not a transparent shader, so why the heck is it responding to a transparent shader? It's not like there is a Z-Write thing where that shader is going at a different time or something. It's just a difference between the Unity legacy shaders and the way that this is working. What if we just change the shader quote-unquote model? It was at 3. Let's go ahead and change it to 5 and see if anything changes. No. Let's go ahead and change it to 2 and see if anything changes. Those are the highest and lowest values. No. So the shader model doesn't appear to have any effect on this. Oh, okay. So what I just did is I switched it over to a... does it? So first off, this is definitely better. I just switched it to being alpha to coverage instead of transparent. But here's the thing. Even though this shouldn't be a transparent shader, it is because we're doing alpha, or not alpha, but additive. But this works. So what I've done is I've taken out the fade factor, and instead I'm just using a flat value factor. And this is just like on off, right? But since it's an alpha shader, it still has that nice transparency to it. And we should be able to factor that limit. It's not letting us factor it. Okay, so we're going to have to add in a factor for that limit. Brilliant. Not a big deal. All we're going to have to do is split out these values. So what is it? Split, channel, break into components. So if we put the color in here, boom, and then we recombine it, I want to recombine composite. I can't ever remember. They name their things a little bit strange. Append. Yes, of course it's called append. That makes sense. Anyhow, we just put these back in. And then bring it over here. And the big difference here is that our A and W are going to be changed, because what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new field, float1. We're going to call this the transparency limit. And then we're going to do a step. And what this step does is it will say that if something is greater than something, it's 1, otherwise it's 0. So if we set this up as a step, we should get a pure 1 and 0 out of the append. The only problem is I can never remember which direction that goes, so we might be going in the wrong direction. We'll know right away because it'll punch out the insides. Yeah, so that's the wrong way. That's fine. So we'll just flip it around. There we are. And so now what we can do down here is we can change this transparency limit and get a different sort of thickness to these particles. See? Now obviously these particles are far too big, and that's been on purpose. We're going to lower them back down to 0.1. And you can see that now we've got these really, really bright particles. And what we actually want to do is have them fade the further away they are from the center of the object. Now to do that, all we have to do is take these RGB values and multiply them based on the distance from the center, or rather 1 minus the distance from the center, or not 1 minus, but some, we're dividing them from the distance from the center. They're getting dimmer as they move away. So for that, we're going to need an object position and our local position. I think we can just use our local position because it should be in world position or vertex position. Which one of these? Vertex position. Because I think that this is local and relative to the object. And to test that, we'll actually use these as our X, Y, and Z. And the reason for that is simple. It'll give us colors, and we should be able to see the colors in terms of quadrants of the sphere. Or what is it? Octants, not quadrants. Unfortunately for us, it appears that that's not working. So that means that the vertex position is, if it's white, why is it white? Let's cut one of these out. Okay, so I cut out the R, and you can see that we've still got the GB. But the thing is that these are both 1. The GB is both 1 out of a possible 1. When what we really should have is a variation between, -1 to 1 and all that stuff. We shouldn't have any verts at 1. It may be that we're getting the world position out of this instead of the local position. That's the only thing I can think of. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. Now this is a vertex position in object space. So why is it always 1? Fascinating. What do you think position from transform means? Is this supposed to be a transform input? Oh, it has to be a transformation matrix, I see. That's not going to be of much use at the moment. World space camera position, compute grab screen space. Posterize. Well, the whole point of this was that I had assumed that the world position, or the vertex position, would be where I thought it was, and it wasn't. So that is interesting. Let's go ahead and see whether or not the world position is what I thought. So this is all 1, which means that I think what we're getting here is world position rather than center of particle system position, which is a shame. I was mistaken, and I thought this was going to be relative to the transform, and instead it's just that there is no such thing as local space. So if I were to move this down to 0, 0, 0, which unfortunately I can only do by dragging it an absurd distance, and then I go down here into the bottom, you can see that now the particles are all multicolored because their position is relative to the world 0 rather than the center of the particle system. All right, that's a shame. My trick is not gonna work. I assumed that I would be able to use this, and it turns out I can't. Which means that there's no reason to do this. It would just be a waste of everybody's time. So we're gonna go ahead and delete all that shit. That's what you get for thinking you know what's going on and being wrong about it. So we're going to go back over into the particle system, and we're going to build a slightly better setup. So we're going to use the old particle method. Now we could use that cutout particle setup with the alpha mask. I think we can do it without needing to create our own system, though. I think that's a default setup. So we're going to take this dust cloud, we're going to turn it into a light cloud. And we're going to change it from alpha blended to God, I hate this so much. This is such a dumb move on Unity's part. Additive. There we are. So if we change it over to additive, then we'll get some similar stuff, but it will be boop, additive instead of alpha blended. And that means that we should get some nice glow. Only problem is that the particle systems that we're using don't appear to have very much transparency, or don't appear to have very much brightness, but that's okay. We can deal with that. And what I think we're going to need to do is, why are these so square? I guess that must be the nature of the fog. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. What I really want to do is have a double set of particle systems, but that's kind of expensive. Werbus stopped in. Hello, Werbus. Let's go ahead and try it anyway. We'll go ahead and give ourselves a double setup just for the sake of testing it. Now, I can always create my own custom setup. I can always create my own custom object, but I think it's worth trying to use the built-in ones for now. So what we're going to do is, by having two of them, we will have something that's on top of the light. Now, in this case, the light is an invisible object, so you can't really tell. But the idea here is that we will be able to have an inner and an outer layer. So we'll go ahead and make this 0.02 and 0.05. And the inside should be brighter and heavier. This is not how I want it to be, though. I really want to use two different particle shapes, I think, with the inner ones being motes rather than dust particles. For now, I think I'm going to replace this with, what do you think, simple foam? No. I'm thinking the default particle. I think that's actually a better fit for what I'd like. Anyway, we can then just delete the other guy. Boom. And then duplicate and put him in. Boom. And shaboom. And let's go ahead and see how it looks. Now, the big problem with this is that it is a little bit too expensive for what it does. It's 4 objects 4 particle systems for just that. Okay, so I think what I need is I'm also going to need a halo. I'm gonna need a transparent sphere. Let's go ahead and do that too then. So if we create, we're gonna need a lot of these. Why I'm spending so much time on this is we're gonna need more than just one. We need quite a few. But what we're gonna want here is a glowing element, and I don't believe that we have one right now. We've got the light cone, but that's not quite what we want. As you can see, what it does is that. Strangely, the sphere doesn't appear to be scaled correctly. Why is it squashed? Oh, is the cube squashed? The cube is squashed. Why is this just shouldn't be inside the cube then? Just move it outside of the cube. There we go. So this is what you sort of get when you use the this light cone element. You get these shattered pieces. So what we're going to want to do is create a duplicate of that, which we're going to call a light. So here's the thing. This is really nothing more than a 3D. What are those called? The lens flares. Light flare. The thing is that in theory we could just use the flare, right? These lights have the ability for us to specify a flare. So if we were to go over here and try and choose a flare, like say the sun, in theory we should get the right effect. But in practice, Unity apparently broke their flares. And I haven't been able to get them to work ever. Not since updating to 2019 or whatever. So as you can see, there's no fucking flare. And all I can assume is that their flares don't work anymore, because you didn't have to use to do anything else. It was just, hey, look, it's a flare. But we could turn on Draw Halo. And as you can see, the halo is relative to the size of the light. Now the problem with that is that the halo is always much too large. It's like your light has a range of 3 meters and you can't see shit within 1 meter. Why is it such a large halo? So what we need to do is basically the same thing that the halo would do if it was created correctly, but it's not. So we have to do it ourselves. Quite a shame. If you know how the flares work or don't work now, let me know, because I would like to be able to just do that. But I can't, so we're going to do it manually. Now, we're not going to actually do a flare in terms of it tracking the camera correctly, because that's not really what we're after. We're just going to have a setup where it... oh, we don't want a sphere collider. That would be nonsense. There we are, like this. We're just going to do something else with it. Don't worry about it. Anyhow, if we then rotate this sphere, doop, doop, we can get something that looks like this, see? And then we can change the sphere's scale to be something closer to what we actually want it to be. Now, the only problem with this is that this is a very opaque light flare. It's really, really aggressively bright, but if we turn down the soft particles mode, we can basically get it to vanish in a very cheap and stupid trick that only works in specific situations. But that should be enough for us right now. Yeah, so here you can see that what we have is a light halo. I think it's still a little too big, but the problem is, of course, oh, it actually works. I was thinking that that was gonna cause errors. So anyway, that actually works, except for it feels really strange and dead, right? It kind of feels like it's made out of glass. So what we need to do is we need to make it wibble and wobble. And I think that unfortunately for us, we're going to have to do that using a custom shader. I don't think we can do it using this shader. But what we could do is we could use our one of these, maybe the Wiggly Jelly shader. Let's try it. Let's unrotate the sphere. And let's just see how this feels, because obviously the Wiggly Jelly shader is not the correct shader. Certainly not the correct material. Okay, so you can see there's occasionally a flash. That's not great. But the idea here is that we can have this distort. I think we're going to need a custom shader, so that's no big deal. Let's create one. So to create a custom shader, we just repeat everything we did earlier. Amplify shader. It is unlit. But the problem is that if we say it's unlit, it's going to cause errors. This does have to have fade. So we're going to have to call it a surface shader. We don't really have a choice. Grind. Let's call it light halo. And then what we're going to do is rename this to light halo. And create a new material based on that. Kaboom. Oh, it's okay. Fuck you. Then we'll open up the Amplify shader again and name it Light Halo. And then we'll save it. This is clearly a bug. For some reason, the more recent versions of this shader editor refuse to notice that anything over here has changed. So in order to save shit, you've either got to just randomly wait for 10 minutes, or you've got to make a change over here. And it is the most annoying shit. Oh God, there's so much wrong with the more recent versions of Unity. Why can't they not suck? Oh, you know what? We could use the fog shader now that I'm thinking about it. Let's go ahead and just see how it looks with a fog shader attached to it before we make any more work out of this. So if we grab the fog shader, just drop in the fog card here. We still got a flash. You see those flashes? I don't know what's causing that. So the fog shader is not a terrible fit, but it does have some problems. One of the main problems it's got is that it doesn't wobble. So basically what we might want to do is the fog shader, but with some wobble. And you can see one of the other problems this fog shader has is that it deletes particles. See that? Now the reason for that is because the fog system itself writes to the clipping, writes to the stencil. So the Z buffer, it writes, it says that it exists. So what we really need is a duplicate of the fog card shader. So let's go ahead and close the other shader down, create a duplicate of this guy, which we're going to call a light card. Open it up. We'll rename it. Wait for 45 or 50 seconds until it saves. Thank you. And now if we go over into this, we should be able to create a light card. Create material light card. And we'll just drop the light card in there instead of the fog card. Boom. And it should be nearly identical, but there are some changes because the light values have shifted back to a neutral setting. If we look at the values that we've got here, first off, let's go ahead and delete the stuff we created because the light halo is no longer necessary. Jaboom. So we've got a bunch of stuff going on in here, but it's all depth fade related, which is why I'm not sure why it was like sparking. I'm not sure why it was flashing. Why would it flash? Let's go ahead and see whether it still flashes. Yeah, see, it's flashing. So that flash, not sure. See that? Why is it flashing? What causes that flash? Anyway, you can see that it is still arguing with us about whether or not it should have priority or particle systems should have priority. So what we're going to do is, since this is supposed to be a small effect that vanishes much faster and much earlier than the fog effect, we're going to go ahead and make it so that it does not ever write to the buffer. So the Z-write mode is already off. The Z-test mode is already at less. The extra depth pass. So this is like... That's not it. There's something else going on here. I think we're going to have to change it to custom blend mode rather than unlit. So here's a custom type render. Is this the custom that we need? Yeah, okay. So I've changed it over to custom, and the reason for that is because we're going to need to do some fancy dancing stuff to try and make it stop doing some of the stuff I want it to stop doing. So as you can see, it's not quite the same visual now that I've changed it, which is a little odd because it should be exactly the same. Well, let's see if it still seems the same out here in... Oh, okay, so I just turned off the extra depth pass. That appears to be what was breaking it. I'm still getting flashes. I don't know what those flashes are. So the idea is that we shouldn't see any vanishing of the particles. The particles should be constant. Yeah, so this is how we want it to be with this custom blend mode, so that it doesn't do any Z-writing at all. It doesn't exist. But we're getting flashes, and I'm trying to figure out why we're getting flashes. There are a couple of things it could be. One of the things it could be is the brightness could be sneaking over... Hold on, the microphone is falling. It could be sneaking over the effect line for bloom. Let's go ahead and just check that by turning off the bloom. So to turn off the bloom, we need to track down the camera. There you are. And down here in the post-process layer, we'll just turn that off. Another potential thing is it could be interacting with aura in some way, so we'll turn off the aura if this doesn't work. Alright, so I don't know why it's suddenly churning like a dog, but that definitely fixed it. So it is sneaking over the bloom limit, and that's why it's doing that. Which isn't necessarily bad, but it means that our bloom limit is set up wrong. So we're going to have to go into the bloom and tweak it until things stop flashing, which I presume we can do with using an elbow. Yeah, so that seems to have done okay. It might have been both, like the fact that it was doing both aura and bloom was what was screwing it up. I don't see any flashing anymore. So this seems to be okay. That seems to be what I want, except there's a lot of slowdown, and I'm not sure what's going on with that. There's a lot of things it could be. I haven't done any real optimization yet. My guess is that chances are these guys are recalculating. So you can see that here, created 77 particles. This is in the rope initialize section. So if I were to press play, you can see how what we're getting here is a lot of rope recalc. And that's causing the slowdown. So the question is, why is the rope recalculating? And if we go into the rope and take a look, it might be because I named it initialize. It's possible that initialize is a reserved Unity keyword that I never actually considered. So we're just going to rename this from initialize to initialize rope. Hello? We're just going to do it manually. Oh, okay. Oh, for fuck's sake. I don't know what's up with this thing. It's also buggy as hell. So anyhow, now we have initialize rope instead of initialize. And if we look up here at start, there's no start. And if we look here at update, there's no update. So the hope here is that initialize was getting called by a Unity internal system that thought it was a Unity hook when it wasn't intended to be. Nope, we still created a bunch of particles. So these are still happening even though we have specifically told it not to do that. If we take a look, it's getting called from QuickGen, which is getting called from update in the rope handle. Ah, okay. So what we're going to do is over here in the rope handle, we're going to make sure that this only happens if we're not in play mode. So we're going to go ahead and say, if we're in play mode, if application is running, is playing, my bad. Playing is playing, there it is. If application is playing, then turn ourselves off. How do I turn ourselves off? Oh, enabled, that's what it is. That way, update won't get called. So I don't want to turn off the game object because that would actually make all the meshes vanish. I just need to turn off the one script. There we are. We're no longer generating a million meshes, but it looks like we're no longer generating any meshes. That's interesting because those meshes should just exist. Look. There they fucking are. Why do they go away when I hit play? Well, the particles all exist properly. And the rope display has a mesh. 0 verts, 0 tries. Why? $3,000 verts. What's going on? Why is this not surviving into play mode? It's not part of a it's not part of a fabricated prefab or anything. So why is it vanishing? I don't understand why this mesh isn't surviving into play mode. What's going on? Why is this mesh vanishing once we hit play? It's clearing this mesh. So the question is, what is clearing the mesh? Is there something in the rope display clearing the mesh? Let's go ahead and check. So here we've got this clear. We're going to go ahead and put in some debugs. Debug.log clearing rope visual. And I believe that's the only place that clears the mesh. Yeah. So let's see if that's getting called for some reason. It could also be a problem with Unity's serialization issues. Clearing. No, it's being cleared. So let's take a look. Why is it being cleared? It's being cleared from the handle bank. Okay, so this needs the same setup as the handle. No biggie. Basically, the transform counts as changed when you enter into play mode. Even if the transform doesn't move, it still counts as changed. Whatever. All right, perfect. Finally. So now what we need to do is get this fog card to be working correctly. And it's not a fog card, it's a light card, right? So the basic way that the light card works is it uses depth checking. And you can see that what we've got here is this strange crisp line at the bottom, and then there's this heavier white area at the top. That's because at the top, the depth is further away, and it becomes more and more opaque the further away whatever is behind it is. That's not actually what we want. So we're going to fix that. That works well for fog, but this isn't fog. This is a light element. So what we actually need to do is just determine how far it is from the camera, and that's what we need. So this depth fade based on the distance here outputs a linear gradient, the geometry behind, blah, blah, blah. Just delete that and delete this, and then just immediately move this. Hit save. And so now it should be just based on the distance between us and the camera. So you can see it's super bright and still flashing. We'll deal with that. And as we get close, it should become dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. The camera, that is. Well, it doesn't seem to be doing much. It's definitely fading out, but the fade out is so gradual. Let's go ahead and just see what the actual values in question are, because maybe we just have to change them. So here's the light card, color and thickness. If we change the thickness to 50 or 60, let's just take a look. I should probably just reprogram it. Yeah, so now as we get closer, it fades much faster, but it still doesn't really fade out entirely. So I think what we need to do is set this to be a set of distances. So we got the world space and the world position distance. See that? And so what we're going to want to do is create some new properties. Flit. Now let's just go ahead and duplicate this guy. This is going to be a min distance. And this is going to be max distance. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the distance as it is, and we are going to clamp it. Boom. And as you can see, it takes in min and max arguments like so. Unfortunately, I still haven't figured out how to turn off the autosave, so it won't save when I'm editing things over here, and it'll constantly interrupt me to save when it's over here. I know that I set it up, so it's bonkers that I haven't figured out how to turn it back off. Well, now that that's clamped, what we can do is we can lerp. So what we want to have it at is 0 transparency at min distance and 1 transparency at max distance. So in order to do that, we're going to have to get the delta between max and min. And then all we have to do is subtract min. So now we've got two numbers that are correctly set up, and then we can divide. And that'll give us a value between 0 and 1. Now the thing is, I think there's a faster way to do it, like a smooth step or something. No, it's not a smooth step. That creates like a staggered thing as a remap. Remap, there it is. So here you can see the remap. So what we're trying to do here is this same crap, but without all those nodes. So remap takes in an input, which is going to be our distance. And then the old min and the old max versus the new min and the new max, which are correct. Much easier. See? So as long as you know all of the random keywords that you are expected to know, stuff works great. So the only problem here is that we need to make max bigger than min for obvious reasons. But we'll go ahead and set this to be like 100. Okay, so flashing, not great. And you can see how it just kind of fades out. That's correct, but the values are obviously wrong. So we'll just change this from 15 down to maybe 4. I don't need that flash, but that is basically how I want it to look aside from the flash. Ah, he'll change every one of us or whatever. So the last thing we need to do is create some wobble. So the wobble is just going to be a local offset based on the time and the noise. So we'll create some noise. And now we're going to want to have a wobble direction, which we'll set up as a vector 3. And then what we'll do is multiply. But these are all a little bit too close, so let's move them. I said let's move them. There we are. And basically, we're just going to tell this to wobble in this direction based on a noise-generated value. But the noise-generated value is going to need to be modified, so normally it's between 0 and 1, or -1 and 1, and we're going to want to add in a factor here. Why are you... Yeah, that's correct. And this noise data needs to take in a size. I'm still not sure, but I think that that can just be the position, right? I can't remember. Well, we'll just use the world position here. And then, of course, we will multiply it by a frequency. And we'll change this from the wobble scale into amplitude. And obviously this gets multiplied again. It's bonkers that there's no 3D noise. So when we pass this value in, hopefully it will automatically drop a coordinate, but it may insist on us passing in only a vector 2. No, okay, it'll automatically drop it. That's fine then. And the frequency, I think, is wrong, but well, I'll play with it a little bit and we'll figure it out. All right, so here we are back in Unity. The only problem is that we can't actually see the sphere very well because it's invisible to us at this range. But one of the things we can do is reduce the size of these 3D icons. They're way too big. And then we zoom out. You can see it. Can you see it? It's not a sphere anymore. It's like a donut. See that? That's because we forgot to add in a time factor. So what we're going to have to do here is add to the world position a time. So we're going to take this wobble direction here, and we are going to add the wobble direction to the world position, but only after we've multiplied the wobble direction by time. So there we go. So what that'll do is it'll just continually skate along, but we do want to have the time have a frequency, so we're going to go ahead and multiply this, and we're going to put it over here, and it's going to be speed. All right, so now you can see how it's kind of... Obviously, the distance is rather too high, so we'll just drop the distance down. Because we want it to be spherical, we just want it to wobble. Okay, and then we can change these other values in live time. So when we take a look at that sphere, it's definitely a little bit flashy. So one of the issues we've got is that the frequency is wrong. The whole thing is kind of wobbling as if it's a living animal. We don't actually want that. So what we're going to need to do is change that to be a different set of values. I can't remember if I needed the frequency to go up or down. Ah, up. Okay, so there. Something more like that. Exactly, except for, of course, the speed is much too high, and the amplitude is much too high. That's not too shabby. The opacity is still very high, because we're remapping between 0 and 1, when what we really should be doing is remapping between 0 and something of our choice. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're just going to come down here to the remap. Yep, there it is. Create max opacity. That's still a little bit heavy. Let's bring the max opacity down a little bit more. There we go. We just want it to be noticeable. Now you might be thinking this feels quite fake, and that's because the light is actually floating in deep space right now. There's no light fixture for it or anything. But aside from that bizarre flashing, which I think is because the bloom is set up to use a calculated brightness while ignoring transparency. My guess is that it's happening at the wrong time. Don't really know. We'll figure it out. That is how I want it to feel, though, more or less. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and create a duplicate and put it on the other side. So if we go over here to the point light and just move it to the other side for now. Now what we can do is we're going to go ahead and save this point light as a prefab, even though that's asking for trouble. So boom, there we go. And what we can do now is we can move the point light around a little bit to see if it feels any better. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to drop this down, but we're still going to have the light, or vice versa, sorry. We're going to drop these down, but we're still going to have the light floating above. And the reason for that is because I want to know whether or not this feels right if it's butted up against a mesh. So the one on the left is the one we just modified. And to be honest, that doesn't feel too bad to me. Obviously, what we'd really want to have is a mesh emitter. So let's go ahead and build one. I got a details, hulls, modular, morph, small ruins, subtest, surface greebles, tunnels, and untitled. None of these really fit. Let's go ahead and put it in cables for now. We should probably just create a new place. Let's go ahead and save this, and we will call it devices. Now, the big thing about devices is that it doesn't have any of this shit in it, so we're going to delete all that shit. And we're going to add in a new mesh. Oh, you know what? This is dumb. Let's close that and delete it. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because that is an ancient file that is badly damaged, and it would make more sense for us to create a new one. So let's open up Blender. Blender. There we are. Much better. Now I'm actually going to shut you off for a second. Boom! While I set this all up. Devices. That was easy. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a problem because it's a different category. Oh, no, that's not it. There it is. So anyhow, this is deleted. There we are. Delete. 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 Get rid of it. Delete. There we are. Add in a circle. We're not going to need that much circleness. Just 12 verts is fine. And this is much too big, so we're going to shrink it down. And then we're going to extrude it in. And you can see that because I'm not a fucking idiot, backface culling is already turned on. Can you imagine having backface culling on? What a strange thing, right, Blender? Oh, that wasn't what I wanted. And basically, we're just going to come down into a mount that will allow us to stick this wherever it needs to go. And later on, we can polish this to be more in line with whatever specific setup we're using. But for now, this will do. Here's the trick, though. We're going to need to break this into two different materials. Or we could use one material with very careful UV mapping. I guess those are both fine. Let's go ahead and keep it as one material for the sake of not making these heavy. First things first, let's set it up as smoothed. Boom. Except, of course, we're going to want to turn on auto smoothing. 30 is apparently a little bit too low. Let's bring it up to 45. Or 35, that's fine. So within that limit, what we're going to need to do is do some UV unwrapping, but I think we can cut this at specific locations to make our job a little bit easier. So we'll cut here. Mark seam. Did that work? No. It deselected it. Of course it did. Mark seam. And then we're going to want to cut somewhere else. It doesn't really matter where. But not into that area. And then we'll want to also cut a divot and mark all of that as a seam. Now we're going to pull in our UV editor. There we go. And unwrap everything. Boom. So what we've got here is just a bunch of random crap. That's fine. All we need to do is move it into the right spot with this guy up here. This guy. Oh, no, they're connected, apparently. That's fine. Down here. And this guy, I don't know, here-ish. We're not really worried too much about using all of the UV map for this, for reasons that will become obvious. We're reusing certain textures that already exist. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and call this a light mount. Save it. Go back over here into Blender. No, this isn't Blender. Back over here into Unity. And then we're going to set up a new... Oh, wait, it's not going to let us, is it? Because it's a piece of shit. Well, let's try it. I'm going to set it up with a new 3D object, which will start it as a cube, and then we'll change it over into the light mount. And we're going to need to have a specific... Doop, doop, boop, a specific material for this light mount. So in order for that to happen, first off, the light mount is just too big. There, bring it down a little bit. And second off, why is it surrounded by a green box? Is that the box glider, even though it's turned off? It is. So it looks like I made it a little too flat. Not a big deal. Let's just make it a little bit taller, which is not too shabby. Just move this down a little bit and then scale it up on the z-axis, and then move it down a little bit, and then maybe we will scale it up like this. I think that's kind of cute. Blorp. Perfect. And then that's going to be a material that we are going to need to actually create as a custom new material. We'll put it under machinery here, and we will call it light mount. The difference with this and other sorts of setups is that we're going to have an emission map, and the emission map is going to be one of our many existing textures. I think I have it backwards, though. Ah, I do have it backwards. Well, that's fine. Just drop it in. Anyway, this light mount there you can see. As you can tell, the light mount is not properly set up because I got it backwards. I think what I'll do is I'll just change it over here. I just move this down here. And move this over here. That's not too shabby. I mean, obviously it's pretty shabby. Okay. I was hoping that I had a texture that would work, and I clearly do not. Yeah, that's close enough. All right, so that should be okay-ish. The other thing we want to do is drop in some kind of machinery sort of thing into the albedo here. We'll just go ahead and find something that has some sort of feel to it. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to exist. We'll change it later. There we have it. So now what we've got is a light mount that will hopefully allow us to get a good feel for our setup. So the particle system and the sphere are in the right place, except for I think that the sphere and the particle system are actually just a little bit too high. So we'll just drop them down just a touch. And then let's see how that looks. I actually think they looked better when they were a little bit higher up. Okay, so try that out. I don't think that moved them at all. Apparently the undo doesn't work past the no, they're in the right spot now. I should raise them up a little bit more. Yeah, that's a little bit more like what I want. You see that? Can you feel that? Now the material got damaged. It was undoing the material rather than me moving shit, which isn't really what I wanted. Oh no, it's still correct. Okay. Oh, is it just because the albedo is so high? Let's bring the albedo to gray. Play. Now, the other thing we can do is, right now it's a point light. We could transform it into another kind of light. That would probably help. Right now, our light is what's causing the side of this to highlight, because it's made out of a much lighter material than the rest of the box. But The glow in the middle is mostly due to it being a point light. So what we're going to do is we are going to adjust this point light into a spotlight. But the problem is that I believe it's just pointing in completely the wrong direction, as you can see. So what we have to do is rearrange everything. And what that really means is that we want the mount to be the center here. And what that means is that we've got to go out of our way to undo all of the prefab packing, so we can move shit, put it back together, and then we'll want to delete the prefab we created because we're not allowed to override it anymore. There we are. So the light is here, and for some reason, the sphere, I didn't put the sphere in the right spot. I bet that's going to be an issue. Yeah, it is, because fuck you, obviously. You happy now? Can we get back to actually doing work, or do you need more paperwork? Oh, yeah, that's more like what I want it to be. So, what I'd really like to do is go back to the scene now. Is there any way to go back to the scene, or do I have to go and track it down? I don't see any way to go back to the scene. So let's go down and find our scene. I pressed Control S. What does Control S mean? Does it not mean save? Alright, let's try that out. Ono Maestro says, when is the big white coming? I haven't put in any monsters yet, but none of them are going to be direct threats to you in a classic sort of video game way. They're going to be some threat, but you're going to want to you're not going to want to fight them. So what we're going to do is the great whites and stuff. I'm going to focus mostly on making them feel really dangerous. So they're going to like have all sorts of effects and stuff. But I'm not ready for that yet because I haven't even gotten the basic play in place yet. We're just playing around with this light, struggling to get Unity to do what it used to do in 10 seconds. And now, of course, it takes 15 or 20 minutes to do the same thing because there have been upgrades. And that means that everything sucks. The good news is that, as much as I'm whining, we are making progress. And what that means is that in the not-too-distant future, we will be able to do things like giant octopuses and great whites and all that stuff. It should be a lot of fun. I'm not too worried about realism in this game, so we're probably going to have some pretty fantastical monsters, which should be great fun, at least for me to put together. Anyway, we've now got the system working. What we're going to need is to continue this setup out into the far areas here. And what that's going to involve is duplicating some of these ropes, putting them on the far side, and setting them up again. So in order for that to happen, we are going to go into the prefabs and grab the rope. There it is. And what we're going to do is drop this into the heavy end connector. Uno Maestro says, Cthulhu NPC. So I don't have any interest in Cthulhu, but there are definitely going to be some giant squid monster type things. Of course, the rope got put in a slightly weird sort of arrangement, but that's okay. We can fix it. There we go. I'm not sure why it came in as oddly scaled and garbaged, but that's fine. Oh, obviously that was what I was trying to do. There we go. So that's going to be one of our ropes, and what we can do is we can grab the end point of this rope and put it wherever we want. So right now it's over there for no particular reason, and what we can do is just drag it to a location that makes more sense for us, like, say, over here. Now you can see that we have an issue where this rope is dropping through a surface because it doesn't know how to go around shit. Now the way to fix that is to have a middle point that allows this rope to get moved around stuff. And in order to do that, we're just going to need to duplicate this extension and move it out into this area here. Move it out into this area here and set this up as the new element 2. So this gets moved to here, and then this is going to be midpoint. And move that into the middle. And then we can move the midpoint to help us go around that box. Now you notice that it's not automatically recompiling, and that's because I haven't labeled the midpoint as a handle. I've only labeled it as a place for the rope to go. But if we add in a handle component, and we point it at the correct rope, then immediately it'll start to calculate whenever we move it. And you can see that we can get some stuff out of this that works. What I think I want to do is actually drag it over. Don't scale it, just move it. I want to drag it over this little bump. There we are. So you can see that now that contains just a continuous rope going all the way out to that location. And that is the handy way that we'll be doing that sort of thing, which obviously means that it's very easy for players to follow, and they can just follow the ropes if they feel like, you know, getting somewhere fast. These are particularly glowy ropes, and what I'm thinking about doing is playing up the difference between the way the ropes shine and the way that the undersea monsters might work. So I'm thinking about having some octopuses or things that are pretending to be ropes. I think that would be a lot of fun. You can see we fell through here. Not sure why, but we can fix that. Yeah, for some reason we still have a couple of small issues with occasionally falling through the surface. It really shouldn't be happening, but for some reason it is. And I just don't know why. It obviously has a hard time going up hills, but that doesn't look like a particularly severe uphill. Look, it's not even falling through on the steep part of the uphill. It's falling through at a random spot that's got nothing to do with the uphill. Obviously, I'm going to need to tweak. I'm going to need to tweak that because it's not, as should be obvious, it's not supposed to do that. I think what's happening is it's using the broadcast. Sorry, not the broadcast. It's drawing a line between the 2 points, and then it's moving the wrong direction. That's my guess. So, with that in mind, let's go in and take a look at that particular piece of code. If we take a look at how this code works, here's where we check for collisions. What we do is we start a sphere cast, and the sphere cast is from where our particle was along the direction of where our particle is now. And what that means is that we are looking from where we started to where we stopped and trying to see whether or not there's a collision. If there is a collision, we move them away from the collision point according to the normal, which just basically means that as our particles drop, they're not allowed to drop through the floor. And then what we do after that is we determine whether or not okay, so after that what we do is we draw a line between the previous point and this point, so along the rope. And when we hit anything along that direction, we move it up and out from the normal. Let's go ahead and take away that radius divided by 2. That's probably the problem. So let it recompile. And then what we'll do is we'll just have this recalculate. Boom. Okay, so it didn't really change anything. Let's go ahead and try some tricks here. One trick we'll do is we'll just turn this off, and we'll see whether or not that's actually causing us any sort of advantage. Okay, so that is definitely at least partly responsible for fixing the situation. It's just not doing it well enough. Is the problem that the sphere cast needs to be... No, that's a radius. What happens if we do this in the opposite order? I'm trying to figure out why this could be happening, and I don't have a strong visualization tool for this, so it's hard for me to tell. Okay, so that definitely doesn't work. I can't even see the particles anymore. There's definitely something wrong. One of these is in backwards or something. I'm not sure what to do about that. Oh, is it this? We are using A, right? Yeah, okay. So that's correct. Oh, look at this. Why is it an edge case right there? There's like one point where it's an edge case. I could do it manually, like step by step, and see when it falls through. Is it because the rope... Oh, there's the problem. The rope is passing through the surface. I'm just an idiot. That red line is where the dots spawn, and they're being spawned below the surface. That's the problem. So what we really need to do is add in another midpoint. And that's, not a big deal. We'll just... take this midpoint and put it above the surface. Yeah, so the issue here isn't anything about the simulation, it's that the particles are starting underground. So they're not falling through, they're starting as fallen through. So there are a lot of things we can try and do to make that not happen, if we would like to. I could come up with all sorts of functions that will, try and test and see whether or not it should be, moving up to the surface or whatever. But for now, let's just go ahead and do that. I knew it was some weird edge case. It's just that I didn't open my eyes. Now, remember that this is all dead terrain at the moment. There's no plants or dust or anything. It's just a pretty scrubbed together level for the sake of testing how this all works. Yeah. So the loop feels a little bit odd, that guidance loop. But to be honest, I think it adds a little bit of charm. I think it adds that's something funny that we can see in the loop. It doesn't have to be perfectly realistic at all times. And you can see the loop has a collider. Now I'm not 100% sure that collider is something that we want to have at all times. I may try and do something about that, but it's pretty straightforward, so that's fine. Now the other thing we're needing to do is create a duplicate of this rope here. Doom. And this one is going to be on the other side, something like over there somewhere. And it should be in the same place, right? So let's move it in. And this rope's midpoint, stop point, all this stuff, let's move these around so they're in the right order. But its stop point is going to be over here. See this? So what we're going to want to do is drag this all the way over into this area. And there we are. So if we just zoom in to see what this is like, you can see that it's floating kind of miraculously, but we can just set it up at the entrance so that it's squeaking out through those bits. Now this particular part of the terrain, Inspector tab is a duplicate. Paint. Well, why don't we close the random tab that has nothing to do with anything and try again. So what we're going to want to do is probably try and take away these spikes. They're a little bit too much. So we'll just paint set height. And we will try and select the height, sample the height here. It's much too large, so we'll just lower this down to like a 1 or a 2. And just get rid of some of that spike. Like that. That should do. Now the rope, this one, we can move it so that it puts itself right out through that gap. I don't want it to cycle on the wrong axis though, so let's move until we're on the correct axis. There we go. I move it like that. There we have it. And you can see that this is obviously going off into a weird spot, but that's because all the midpoints are where the other rope's midpoints were. So we're going to just want to change where those midpoints are. This midpoint makes more sense over here. And then this midpoint should be on the other side. Right. So if we take a look at how this rope feels, it does fall through 1 or 2 little objects. We'll go ahead and polish that. But how does it feel in terms of how it wanders around? If we were to just move this midpoint to the edge of the cliff. Oh, is it falling through? Okay, so I can't really move it too far because there is a clipping error if I am not careful. What we can do is we can just push it directly up against this wall. There we are. And then you can see it kind of sags down into the ravine. It sags down here as well. And then it sags down here. But at no point does it feel unrealistic except for that tiny little bit there. This is not in the right spot. The red element is the red bar is moving through, as you can see. So it has to be put in a different location so that we'll be able to actually get all the way down there. And I think that the only way to do that is to actually put it on the far side of the ravine. I think we might need another midpoint to do this. So that's what we'll do. We'll just move this back. Mifaz likes the rope editor. I mean, if I can get the rope editor to feel right, then I won't mind putting it out there for people. But the problem is that this rope editor needs a lot of work before it's really ready for prime time. For example, the way that we keep assigning new midpoints and stuff is obviously garbage. We really want it to happen automatically. We don't want the ropes to be this big when it comes to creating collision stuff. We would ideally only have the colliders in edit mode, and then we'd have optimized colliders in play mode. There's lots of stuff that I would want to do if I was going to make this into an actual product. But I haven't gotten far enough to know what the best things would be. I haven't Haven't gotten to really figure it out just yet. So I think that we're going to want to pull this thing out a little bit further because it's just hiding too far back there. So we'll just have it be a machine that is kind of catty corner like this. And there we have it. And now this particular hook, we could add in a little like mounting mesh that would allow it to feel like it exists. So we'll go ahead and create a 3D object cube, and we'll just scale it until it is the right size. Don't think we want it to have a box glider though. So, and obviously we will replace it with a proper hooky type object later on. There we go. So let's see how that plays as we try and follow it. Oh, I forgot to desync it. Hold on. It's using the same mesh as the other rope, which is why it's doing nonsense. So if we come down to the rope script and we tell it to desync, then we tell it to regen. There we are. And then we're going to want to tell this rope to regen. I forgot about that. It's another thing that I'll want to polish before I try and make this into a product for anybody. For now, I think we should move the other rope a little bit, but I don't want to move any of the midpoints or the stop. So we'll take all of these objects and we'll just lock them. And then we'll grab the rope and we'll move it. And it will have no effect on where those midpoints are. But it does have an effect on where the red beam is. You can see how this red beam is cutting through all sorts of terrain. So in order for this to really work, we're going to need to move this midpoint. It has a red box around it because it's been frozen. So we'll defreeze it. And then we will simply move this to a better location, which would be like up. Now, I think one of the things we could do is I could teach this how to test and see whether or not. That's probably a really good idea. Okay, so before we stop for the day, we're going to update the rope. So what we're going to do is we are going to, down here, when we're drawing lines between the guides, what we're going to need to do is actually create collision markers. So here, when we set the color to this red, we go through all of the guides and we draw a line between A and A+1. What we actually want to do is store those values. There we are. And then we can just say P0, P1 here. But of course, what we actually need to do is use that for a collision detection. So raycast hit, if raycast P0, P1 minus P0, out hit, and then vector3 distance, P1, P0. That should be all correct, right? Yeah, that's fine. So if we do get a hit, then we will simply draw a big fat error marker, which I think what we'll do is we'll draw a box. So a series of boxes. So maybe a sphere would be better. Gizmos. Draw sphere around hit dot point with a radius of 0.3f, and then draw sphere hit dot point plus hit dot normal divided by 3, and then divided by. There we are. So that ought to give us like a bouncy sort of warning And once it recompiles, there we have it, we'll go ahead and test it. So we'll take this midpoint here and we'll move it. And you can see how what we've got is some collision markers. Those really aren't strong enough to feel like we can see them. So we'll go ahead and change the size. So this will be 1, and this will be 1, and this will be 1. We'll make them draw wire spheres so we can see them a little bit inside of each other, you know. And then we will make this normal a little bit different. And we should see a better indicator. Let's go ahead and change this to a 2 and this to a 1.5. You know, I don't really think we need these other spheres after all. I was sort of thinking it would be cool, but it looks like they are just distracting. So we'll just draw 3 nested spheres. Like that. And then what we'll do is we'll make the middle sphere a different color. Boom, boom, boom. Now what we've got is some collisions with the mesh itself. So it's marking collisions with itself, which is why we're getting these collisions here. So what we need to do is make sure that it's not colliding with itself when it does this. So when we have this set up, we're going to make sure that this is not going to be part of our own rope by saying if hit.transform.is child of this, I guess, then we'll want to break it. So if not, then do this crap. Now what we would ideally do is put the rope collider on a different part of the just a different layer, but I can't rely on always remembering our layers. So what we'll do is we will do it like this instead. It's not perfect because in theory you could end up colliding with the rope on the same path that would normally be another type of collision. But once we do this, what we can do is we can allow it to create collision warning handles. So we could just say, oh, if there's a collision, create handles to allow us to get around that collision. And the way we can do that is by having another function which understands how to create and add new rope handles. So that's what we're going to do right now. Public void create handles where collisions. Create handles at collisions. Path collisions. Yeah, whatever. That's fine. And then we'll just do a menu item. Create collision handles. Here we are. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do this exact same thing. We're not going to store where those collisions are. It just doesn't really matter. But we don't need to draw lines. That's for sure. So here we're going to go ahead and if it is colliding with itself, you know what? We're going to actually clear it. Now the reason we're going to clear it is because that allows us to do this without having to worry about whether or not the rope is in the way. And we're going to have to resimulate after we're done anyway, so we might as well clear it. And then when we're done clearing it, we will quick gen at the end. So in the middle here, this won't happen because we don't have any collider. So if we get here into this raycast, then we have a handle and we know where it needs to go. So in order to have that work, we're going to just create a new game object inside of ourself and then add the handle to it. So game object new handle equals new game object, or instantiate game object. I can never remember the exact way to do it. Game object.instantiate. I think we can just do it like that. We need an original. Isn't there a way to create an empty game object? Let's just go ahead and take a look here. Unity, script, new game object. Because we don't really need any specific game object. We just need a generic game object. Sorry, I'm clicking on a search over here. Oh, we just say new game object. Okay, that's fine. And then we just say new handle dot add component rope handle. Now this should return rope handle, and that means that we can say rope handle equals that, and then we can say rh.target equals this. See? And then the rope handle is properly set up, but it's not pointed the right way. So we're going to tell it to, first off, we're going to put it inside of ourself. So rh.parent, new handle dot transform dot set parent us. Can we do this inside of the new game object call? No. So then we're going to say new handle dot transform dot set position. No, we'll just go ahead and say position equals hit dot point, and then we're going to go ahead, let's say hit dot point plus hit dot normal. And then the last thing we're going to say is new handle dot transform dot look. It's not look at though. It's rotation dot look, set look rotation. I believe this is the one that works the way I want it to work. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and set this as the P1 minus P0. And then we're going to add this handle into our list of guides between A and A plus 1. If we look at the guides, is it an array or is it a list? It's a list, so we can insert it directly. And we can tell it to insert at A plus 1, the new handle. We don't even have to rewind, because we already know that there's nothing between the previous handle and this handle. Why is this barfing? Oh, because I need to pass it RH. No? No, it should be fine. New handle.transform. My bad. There we are. So let's go ahead and just think about this for a second, because there are times when this is going to cause an error, and that time is when there's a wall between the new handle and the next position. So we do not want to calculate between us and the next position, because us is going to be wrong. It's going to be the wrong object. We're going to risk an infinite loop. So we're just going to skip. Once we've created a handle, we're going to assume that you're smart enough to move the handle or call create handles at collisions again. So we're not going to keep checking to see whether or not that's going to keep working. Let's go ahead and save that and then return over here. Grind, grind, grind. And then all we have to do is test it. Now, if we test it here, we should get 2 more rope handles. So let's go ahead and try it. So we'll take this rope script and is not static and can't. Why would it have to be static? I've had a lot of problems with getting menu items to actually, it's because it's context menu, huh? Okay, my bad. Here we are. The other thing I want to do is I want the ropes to keep track of whether or not they're using a cloned mesh. And I might as well go ahead and create that now. So over here in the rope extruder, we're going to create a static list of meshes And basically, do we want to create a list of meshes or a list of rope extruders? I think we want a list of rope extruder. There we are. And basically the role of this is to see whether or not a mesh is being used. And there we are. And then we'll check with a mesh. And for each int count equals 0, for each rope extruder RE in rope extruders, if re.mesh equals mesh, count plus plus. Return count greater than 1. Easy enough, right? Now what we have to do is we have to add ourselves to the list of extruders, which we're going to do whenever we generate here. So we're going to go ahead and say if, after the base mesh, there we are, if we're not in the list, so if we're not in the list, add us to the list. If generated mesh equals null, or is mesh overused generated mesh? There we are. That'll keep us from having to desync it all the time. Grind, grind, grind. So we're going to want to save this scene and then give this a shot. Okay, so we've got a couple more handles. You can see we've got a handle here at the end and one here in the middle. These handles are not in the right spot here in this list. We could probably rearrange the list a little bit, but you can see that they exist in the right spot in the setup. But the problem is that they're facing exactly the wrong way, because this blue line here, this is the direction the handle is actually facing. So it should be this way, which just means that we have the P1 and P0 backwards. So let's just fix that. And then we'll go over to the other handle, which is over here, like this. And you can see that it's creating the handles at the locations of the collisions. It looks like there's a little bit of strangeness to where it's looking. Maybe I should take another look at that. No, those are at the right spots. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that some more. But as you can see, this will allow us to break the rope up into sections without having to go through that nonsense of creating and cloning handles and manually setting them up and all that jazz. Instead, we can just have it work. Only problem being that they don't get put into the list in the right way, so they are a little bit hard to select. Still, I have seen worse approaches. And there you can see that what we have is a setup where this is not counting as a collision. Why? It should. Oh, because the collision counts as happening right there. I see. So what we'll do is we'll do another one of these collision creators. Boom. And now we've got a handle, a new handle, that we can move wherever we need to. But this rock is not counting as a collision for some reason, which is strange. It has a mesh collider. That's interesting. I wonder what's up with that. Maybe it's... I don't know. That's... Oh, I know what's happening. It's colliding with the rope first. So it's thinking, oh, look, there's a rope in the way. Look, the blue is backwards. I had it right the first time. There's something wrong with this look rotation. I don't think it's actually working. That's what it is. It's not working. So this is the one that's broken. It's the other one that works. I can never remember which one is which. All we're going to do is look at P1. That ought to do it, as long as that's not broken. Oh, too far. Anyway, if we can use this to kind of hook over that troublesome element, it should be okay. Just kind of like that. And we've got a lot of extra handles here because we were just playing around and it's obviously a little silly, but it's not a big deal to change them. And then we've got this handle up here, which I believe is this midpoint, and obviously that's much too high. But we have a collision warning if we are not careful, so we'll just pull it over to the side here until the collision warning goes away, and maybe kind of hang it off of this wall so it feels more natural. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, my biggest regret about this particular approach is that it is creating a collision mesh for this entire sinuous chain as a single collider, like one giant massive 40,000 face collider, which is not ideal. What we would really like to do is have it have a couple different types of collider. What we really want is a set. We don't mind the 10 million face collider when we are trying to create the ropes in scene view, but we do not want that to be the collider that we use in the game because it's super fat. It's a ridiculously expensive collider. This is actually smaller than I thought it would be. It's only 10,000 tries, but still, it's a very fat collider, and so it would make sense if we used simplified colliders in the game. And what that would mean would be creating elements where the mesh is above the surface by a certain amount, like for example here, and just creating those elements and not creating the one where the mesh is close to the ground. Alternately, we could break the collider up into a certain set of sub-colliders. We'll deal with that when we come to it, but we have to remember that these have ridiculously weighty colliders, so we'll have to be careful to not screw that up too badly. The next thing we want to do is we want this heavy rope to come out and, wind its way all the way around to this rear room, which is where the heavy rope is supposed to be. But I don't think I want to do that today. My voice is going, and it's already been 2 hours. So I'm going to stop now, but I'm going to take some screenshots first. So if you have any questions, you can ask them while I'm taking screenshots. Screenshot. Get nice and close to this light so we get some foot lighting here. So you can see it in the screenshot. Should just be a little higher, perhaps, yeah. And now one of the ropes in question. I should add a debug movement element so that it so I can move real fast when I'm just trying to move around. And one more picture about the end of the rope. Zoop, zoop, zoopity boopity boop. It's supposed to be a very relaxed game, which means developing it is annoying because, you know, it's not, when you're developing it, you're like, I need to move over there. Come on, hurry. This rope kind of reminds me of Beetlejuice. Alright, that should do. Paste and paste. And then we'll say, made good cables. Interface is solid now. Hooray. Screenshot Saturday. Maybe I spelled that wrong. And cable porn. And indie dev, sure. Go all out with all of these. Tweet that, please. And then, sorry, I know someone asked a question. I'm just trying to get these out the door, and then I'll answer some questions. There we are. So, let's take a look. Are you interested in exploration games on a surface level, not space or underwater? So that's an interesting conundrum, because the surface has a very planned out layout. When you're thinking about the surface, it's basically a two-dimensional plane, right? It's got ups and downs, but it's all about you know, sticking to the surface and going over the bump here, bump there. And from a long time, you know, of playing that sort of game with things like Fallout 4 and Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, I don't find that kind of terrain compelling unless almost every inch of it has been planned specifically to be compelling. So, for example, if I'm playing Fallout 4, then the parts of Fallout 4 I find compelling are the parts where I am moving inside of an occupied area or inside of an area where there's a lot of jumping puzzles. I don't find it compelling to just be wandering through the wilderness. And this is something that Skyrim did fairly well, because you were never unable to see something of value in Skyrim. Wherever you were, you could always see a dungeon entrance or a town or a road leading to a town. You were never actually in the wild. But in Fallout 4, those are further apart. The roads mean less because they don't lead places properly. And so I don't really get into those games quite as much. It's not as much fun for me to actually do the exploring part. I play them. They're fun to play. But I don't feel like they're exploring so much as they're just kind of moving through the game. But when it's in space or when it's underwater, I just get a feeling like I'm inside something, you know, and I can see a lot more possibilities for where to go and what to do. So even if the space isn't groomed, even if the space isn't dotted with things that make sense, I can latch onto the things I see much more clearly just because there is a very different distribution of them, and it's in a sphere rather than in a circle. Mifaz says that Dark Souls 1 had some nice verticality, but here's the thing: when you're on the ground, your verticality is in the world, not in you. So verticality is an important level design concept, but when you're swimming or flying, especially zero-G flying like in deep space, then verticality is not even a concept. And it's a purely spherical exploration ideal. You know, it's like you can go anywhere, and therefore you're looking at all of the things in every direction. Whereas even if you have verticality in your level layouts, you're rarely looking up and down at the same time in the same direction in something like Dark Souls. The verticality is used in a very grounded sense, and that makes sense because it's a very grounded game. You're on the ground. It's just that in terms of possibility space, you're still working with what is essentially a ring around your character rather than a sphere around your character. And the ring goes up and down, but it's still a ring, if you see what I mean. But that's just me. I wouldn't want to say that that is, you know, the truth or anything. Anyhow, thanks for keeping me company. I am really enjoying developing this game. It's got some cool stuff in it, even though at the moment it hasn't come together yet. It still looks like shit. But that will change. and I will see you around. Mifaz is talking about how control schemes will affect that. Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about games that are pseudo exploration where you're not really as grounded as you might think, then there's games like Crackdown, for example, or Saints Row 4, where you can fly around and jump hundreds of meters. And I find that those are fun, but the exploration is still quite limited in those games. And maybe that's just because cities are explored in a different manner than jumping hundreds of meters in a single bound. But either way, you have to take into account how your characters move in order to create the levels that you need to create. And for some reason, I need a lot higher density of handcrafted goods when it comes to games that are, grounded when you're when you're walking around. In space games and in diving games, it's just like, oh yeah, whatever is good. I'll find something that's interesting. But when I'm walking around, that's just not the case. Anyway, have a nice week. I'm going to stop before my voice dies.